mountains and the evening sky. To whom do these celestial steeds belong when you appear to us like gods on high? What brings you here to mystify?
Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Joining us today once again is my good friend Fahrusha. She is one of New York's top psychics and the author of a most interesting blog. But today, Fahrusha is going to be telling us all about remote viewing. So, welcome back to the show, Fahrusha. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Kate. How's it going?
Actually, pretty good.
Good.
And, I was reading Joe McGonigal's, I can never get his last name. McGonigal, thank you. That's sort of an odd name. I was reading his book on remote viewing because, I'm not really all that familiar with it. And it was very interesting. He was, if anything, I think somewhat discouraging because I think most people don't realize what really is meant by remote viewing. So maybe you could fill us in on that.
Okay. I have had the privilege of meeting Joe and knowing Joe personally, so I can say that his books are wonderful, and I highly recommend them to start out with. But remote viewing is basically a protocol for clairvoyance and perhaps other forms of clairsentience as well. Now, clairvoyance is something that has been experienced in human history for millennia. You can find clairvoyance back in the Hindu Vedic texts and so forth. I mean, it's not something new to the world, clairvoyance. It's something that's sort of shrouded in mystery, and it's something that the 19th century paradigm of the physical universe kind of poo-pooed.
Yes.
Because most of us here in the world today are still living in the 19th century paradigm of physics, which is a mechanistic view of the way the world works. And frankly, that view brought us a lot of great things. It allowed us to understand laws of motion as they apply to large-scale things, and we have airplanes and all sorts of things as a result of that.
Right.
However, physics has gone further, and now we have quantum theory and so forth, and string theory. And so, while clairvoyance was poo-pooed by the 19th century mechanistic worldview, it has come into more interest since people have begun understanding quantum physics. Okay?
Yes.
And so remote viewing is a protocol for clairvoyance. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, specifically back in the 70s, Russell Targ and Harold Putoff founded the Stanford Research Institute at Stanford University and did physics experiments, which can be read about, and I don't want to go into incredible detail about that, but they did experiments in which they put people into some amount of sensory deprivation, and they did experiments whereby people went out into the field while somebody else stayed in the sensory deprived room. And the person in the sensory deprived room could tell things about where the person out in the field was. Does that make sense? Or
yes, it does.
A little oblique?
No, not at all. And actually, I think the audience, not as you said, not to get into that right now, but the SRI, that institute, if they're interested in this at all, they should look that up on the net and go into it, because I think that was almost the start, especially with people like Russell Targ and Hal Putoff.
It was the start.
And both of these guys were pretty brilliant. I don't know so much about Targ, but I mean, certainly Putoff is a brilliant physicist and lent it a little bit credibility that a lot of these fields had been lacking up until now.
Well, yes. I'm gonna say I also know Targ, and he's a really great guy and a very smart man, beyond belief. And the two of them, I don't know Puthoff at all, but they started the SRI. I want to read a comment from Niels Bohr, who was one of the fathers of quantum physics. And he says here, everything we call real is made of things that cannot be regarded as real. Huh. If quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet.
I would say truer words were never spoken, but I think he was predated by Shakespeare, who said, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
Exactly. Well, I think that what I'd kind of like to do is to tell you about how I came into remote viewing.
Okay, that would be...
And it involves kind of a lot of synchronicities that are very odd.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing. Like they always say, there's no such thing as coincidences. And so you feel like you were sort of drawn into this field.
Yes. Well, I definitely do. I've always been interested and involved with ESP. I've always been interested and involved with, astronomy, and I have been, as you know, an experiencer. As a child, I always had the feeling that reality wasn't quite real. I don't know where I got that from, but it always seemed to me like I wouldn't be surprised if an arm came through the wall out of nowhere.
Wow. Well,
I mean, that's maybe people would say I'm mentally ill, and they wouldn't be the first. But going back to the remote viewing, and I think that I should stress the one thing that I said to begin with, and then go into my own experiences, and that is about the protocol.
Okay.
Clairvoyance is basically, being able to see. The ability to gain information about an object, a person, a location, or physical event through means other than the known human senses. Okay? That's where clairvoyance is. Now, remote viewing is just a protocol to train clairvoyance, and it has been used by the American military. All right? So it keeps the viewer focused. It's a way to close down the left brain and ignite the right brain, sort of. And we'll get into that a little bit more later if you want. But about 10 years ago, I had the misfortune of having two dying parents. And being an only child, I had to sort of, be in charge of what was going on. And in 2003, my mother was very ill. My father had already died, and she was taken into a rehabilitation program. You know how people, they fall down or whatever happens to elderly people, and sometimes they're able to go into a place to get some kind of rehabilitative exercises, etc.
Sure.
And so my mom was in one of those for a period. I think it was 15 or 18 days, and I had been, doing nothing but taking care of my parents for a year. So I decided to do something that I wanted to do for myself, knowing that, she would be adequately cared for at this facility. It was a very nice facility. And so I took myself up to the Omega Institute, where I took a 7-day remote viewing course with former military Defense Intelligence Agency remote viewer David Morehouse, who wrote a book called Psychic Warrior, which is available, you can buy it from all the book outlets on the Internet, or probably it's still in some stores. I don't know. But that was a very, very interesting class, and it took there were about 23 people in the class, and we proceeded to learn the type of protocol that he was taught by the Army, the Defense Intelligence Agency, basically. And we practiced every day. And I heard little rumors around there about the Monroe Institute. And on one of the last nights, we did a remote viewing. We didn't know what it was, but it was a very, very bizarre bizarre situation. Now, what happens when you do a remote viewing is that you're given a target. You're just giving a series of numbers that represents a target. In the case of David Morehouse, the targets were photographs inside of 2 envelopes that had numbers attached to them. He did not know, since the numbers were like 5 or 6 digit numbers, he didn't know himself which target he picked for the group. Okay? So you would come into a room and you would listen to some binaural beats, and you would sit there in the semi-dark, like a subdued light, and you would write down your impressions of what this target might be. And there was a protocol for doing that. You were given instructions that first you would write a line across a page that described the feeling that you got from it. And there were like 5 or 6 stages, very, very involved protocol that David Morehouse was taught by the people at the Defense Intelligence Agency to calm down the right brain and to let the left brain explore. Okay? So this particular night, we didn't know what it was, but the room had a very strange air about it. It was just like it was different from the other nights. And we went away having written our reports and handed them in to Morehouse. And I went out into the open air up at the Omega Institute's beautiful night, full moon shining, really bright, full moon. And I went into the bookstore there, and I grabbed a bunch of books. I didn't even know what they were. Now, I'm a fairly penurious person. I don't have a lot of money. And so for me to go into a bookstore and just grab 3 books off the shelf and buy them.
Wow.
Well, it's an odd thing. And in this case, it was 2 books off the shelf there. And the books that I grabbed was one of Robert Monroe's books and one of Joe McMonagle's books. And I bought something else as a gift for my daughter. And went back to the room, glanced at the books, and saw that they were both about remote viewing, and that Joe McMonagle was Robert Monroe's son-in-law.
Oh.
So the next morning, we went into the class, and we found out that our remote viewing was the full moon. Was the moon landing.
Oh.
The original moon landing.
Oh.
And so the kind of things that came back were odd, and we were told by David Morehouse that whenever he used this target, it was always wonky. You know, he would always get weird stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happened weirdly for me is that I didn't go to the moon, I didn't go to the target, but I went to the right time and place.
Oh.
I mean, I went to the right time. I went to the
like 69 or 1960s?
Right, I went to the Woodstock Festival.
Oh.
I was at the Woodstock Festival, and the music was coming through me remotely. You know, I was getting that music. I was sure it was the Woodstock Festival. Now, this is kind of coincidental because I went to the right time. Why didn't I go to the right place? I can't tell you. I still can't tell you the answer to that. But after I left this class, which I found very, very useful, of David Morehouse's.
Well, I'll tell you, Fahrusha, hang on to that just for a second. This will be what happened to you after you left the Morehouses. We're going to have to take a quick break, unfortunately. This is Kate Valentine. We're on 1160 WVNJ, speaking to Fahrusha, a very well-known psychic, and she's telling us a lot about remote viewing. If you have any questions for her, or give us a post it right now on our website, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. We'll be right back after a short break. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Our guest today is Fahrusha, a well-known New York psychic, and she's discussing everything we're going to need to know about remote viewing. I also strongly suggest you visit her extremely interesting weblog. And so welcome back, Fahrusha. Let's just take off where you were. You were at the Morehouse, and then you came across this book by Morehouse. And
well, actually, the books that I came across at the Omega Institute were by Bob Monroe and by Joe McMoneagle. So I didn't really have a chance to read them much because I was wrapping up my time at Omega and coming back to the New York area here and finishing up taking care of my mother, who unfortunately passed away fairly shortly thereafter. A friend of mine who is listening to the show right now took me out to eat lunch after my mother's demise. And we went to a bookstore, to Barnes & Noble, which is no longer on Astor Place, but then there was an Astor Place, Barnes & Noble. And she left me there. She went to work after we'd eaten lunch. She had to go back to work, naturally. So I was looking at a cup, which is used for tea leaf reading. And it was a special cup that was made for that, and I was looking at it and thinking, you know, it's on sale, it's half price. Maybe I should buy that cup, that tea leaf reading cup. It's a cute thing. It's you know, it's a nice tchotchke to have around. Well, I hear a voice in my ear. And the voice in my ear says, put the cup down. You don't need that now. Go right over to your friend Donald's store, and there is something there that you really need.
Wow.
And I was like, it was a man's voice. I didn't recognize his voice. It was not particularly accented one way or the other. You know, it wasn't like it was a German accent or something like that. It was just kind of straightforward male voice. And needless to say, I was a little freaked out. But I thought about it, and I said to myself, what have I got to lose? The worst thing that happened to me is in the 3-block walk to my friend's used bookstore. I'll get run over by a car. It hasn't happened yet, so it's not likely to happen, and so I might as well just follow the voice. Got nothing to lose here. Weird, but nothing to lose. So I went to my friend's store, and I went to the paranormal section, and I was looking at stuff, and I saw the regular stuff that he normally had there, you know, Seth Speaks and all stuff that I knew about it. Not that I'm not putting that down, but it was the same stuff.
Right.
And so I thought, well, that was weird. There's nothing there.
That's new
and
to
I'm
you.
about to leave the store, and I'm walking towards the front, and I hear the voice chastising me, actually saying, you didn't look good enough. You better go back there and look again. And I thought, oh, this is so weird. And so I went back, and I looked up, and there I saw boxes of tapes, boxes of like cassette tape sets. So I called the gentleman who works in the front of the store, Jordan, and I said, hey, Jordan, can you get me down these boxes of tapes? And he said, sure. And I got them down, and what did they turn out to be but volume 2 through 6 of Bob Monroe's Journeys Out of Body series for the Monroe Institute. And they sell for about $90 a series, give or take, you know, depending. And my friend was selling them for $20 a box. And he gave me a 50% discount.
Even better.
So, you know, for $50, I got volume 2 through 6 of the Monroe Institute.
Wow.
Cassette tapes. They were cassette tapes still at that time, 10 years ago.
Oh, wow. Well, I'll tell you, you certainly piqued some interest here. We had 2 questions come in, and Bill was wondering, is remote viewing something anybody can learn to do, or is it a gift you need to be born with? Or maybe both, I guess, huh?
Well, I think the one thing that you need more than anything else for remote viewing or any kind of ESP type thing to work for you is to believe it's possible. You don't have to believe you're being psychic at any given moment. You don't have to believe that all your remote views are going to come out crystal clear, because they're not. But you have to believe it's possible. So ostensibly, if you are able to open your mind sufficiently to believe that it's possible, you ought to be able to do it.
Oh, so really basically what happens is, let's say you want to remote view something. So you go into sort of a quiet area where, you don't have a lot of outside stimulation, and you just think about it, and I hate to use the word, but you imagine or you image something at a remote point and are able to transmit that either verbally, or you write it down, or you draw a picture of it. Is that about the way it works?
That's very close to how it works. The thing that there's two different things there that you could sort of talk about. Like, say you've lost your ring and you don't know where it is. You could put the image of your ring in your mind and then try to see what's around it, which is a kind of clairvoyance, but it's not remote viewing protocol. Okay? Mm-hmm. Remote viewing protocol, for the most part, would indicate that you have no concept of what the target is.
Okay.
And but there are three ways that I can say that you can become a better remote viewer. You can, learn to meditate. That would help. The use of binaural beats or hemisync, as developed by the folks at the Monroe Institute, Bob Monroe specifically, and the use of this kind of music, which has one thing going in one ear and something else going in the other ear, and when it comes together in your brain, it trains your brain.
Okay.
And then there's, having sensory deprivation, or like a Gansfield type environment.
Well, I'll tell you, the other thing that always impressed me was that people, I think, feel that, if you're psychic, you're born that way, and that's it, and you either are or you're not. But, certainly if you're interested in physics, it's not like you're born with all this knowledge. You actually have to learn it. You have to train in it. You have to develop some sort of a regimen to, if you will, just like a table of contents to place all this knowledge in your brain. And so I think it's the same with psychic abilities. You have to have some sort of a backbone to put these abilities onto.
Okay, I don't disagree with that, certainly. I would say that, again, the most important thing is to believe it's possible. And one way of looking at things, the physics connection is interesting because of
Well, it's a training, just like this should also be considered a training and not considered one of these sort of ultra things that, I think you should be able to pretty much train yourself if you.
Oh, absolutely, you can train yourself to be better at it. Absolutely. You absolutely can. And one way of looking at it is to think about, where does the mind reside?
Okay,
And the mind does not reside in the brain. The brain may be a construct of the mind. The mind resides in no space, which is to say, we live in a four-dimensional reality, time and the three dimensions, the three other dimensions. Right. But the mind doesn't live there, and all the information that you get in remote viewing, all the information that you get if you do psychic readings, it doesn't reside there. It doesn't reside in the three-dimensional space. It resides in consciousness, which is all that really exists, and that is outside time and space.
It would be a very difficult dinner if I had to go out with you and Thomas Fusco at the same time. I doubt if I could get past the soup.
I am very interested in his shows that he's had on with you.
And I'll tell you, he does back up what you're saying, that there is some sort of a super connection, up and above what we know as the four-dimensional field. And so what you're saying is, like, you get information, or you or any sort of a remote viewer would get information from another object in the four dimensions, and you're in the four dimensions, but that object's matrix would be up above us. Your mind would go up above that, and you'd connect up there. Is that sort of it? Not really. It's very hard to say physically how it works because it's not in space-time reality. Okay.
And as Niels Bohr said, the space-time reality which we experience, and physically we do experience it because we are biological beings going in one direction in time. We have to go forward in time because we are biological, and there's something about that it keeps us from going back and forth in time. But in terms of the laws of physics, there's nothing to keep us from going back and forth in terms of time as long as we're outside of our body. In fact, remote viewing allows people to go anywhere in time or space.
Whoa. Okay, we're going to take a break, and I am going to think about that, and we'll be right back with you. How about that? That's a heavy thought there, Fahrusha, I'll tell you. Kate Valentine here, 1160 WVNJ, speaking to Fahrusha in this four-dimensional field about our remote viewing. And I'm sure if you have questions, we'd love to hear them. Put them on our website, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. After the show, you can find out more about this and tremendous number of other very fascinating comments and subjects on Fahrusha's weblog. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Our guest today is Fahrusha, the well-known New York psychic, and she's talking about remote viewing, and I also strongly suggest you visit her very interesting weblog. It's very fascinating. Of course, if you have questions, post them now on our website, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. We had a very interesting one that came in, Fahrusha, over the break from Lenore. And this will be just to get a little bit off the topic of remote viewing and more into UFOs. She was wondering what you thought about the existence of ETs, and she was wondering if you have had any personal experiences or connections.
Well, yes. yes, and yes.
Oh, cool.
I am an experiencer.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen UFOs. I've more than one. I cannot tell you that everything that I saw that was unidentified was a craft from Zeta Reticuli, but I've seen more than one unidentified object in the sky. In terms of UFOs and remote viewing, there are a couple of interesting aspects of that, one of which you know about, Kate, which is that back a couple of years ago, the government, NASA in particular, decided to do an explosion on the moon, to basically send a missile up to the moon and bomb the moon. Now, I believe that the Japanese had already gone up there and discovered that there was water on the moon. And the purported mission was to find out if there was water when they bombed the moon. And whether they did or not, I'm not sure. But I was kind of upset about that because I think that you shouldn't go bombing what could be somebody else's home, or what you don't know where is it you're bombing.
Okay.
And, dimensionally, I'd have to say that it's been fairly clearly established that there aren't other little furry animals walking around on the moon in this dimension, but you don't know. Reality is, again, far more diverse than one would expect. Well, in any case, I was very upset. I was up that morning, very early morning. I was tuned in on the computer to see what was going to happen with this bombing of the moon. And after it happened, basically nothing much happened. It was a dud, more or less, except that the moon vibrated like a bell, apparently. Yes. But nothing. It wasn't a big explosion. It was kind of a letdown, so to speak, for people who were looking for a big explosion. Well, I turned off my computer. I went back to sleep for a little while, or went back to rest, and I decided to meditate on the moon. And when I meditated on the moon, I found that I sort of astrally traveled there. It was more than remote view, which is something else we could get into, different degrees between remote viewing, astral traveling, and out-of-body experience, which are three different things, and there's kind of a gradation. So I feel like I kind of astrally traveled to the moon, and it was like very chiaroscuro, black and white and shades of gray. And I saw there what looked like, not unlike a train, but I didn't get to look at it too closely. It was a piece of disused machinery. It was kind of, looked like it was not corroded, but out of use, and it was kind of laying like a wreck on the moon. And if I say a train, I don't mean that it looked like an actual locomotive, but it had a long sort of...
like a structure, like that type of...
Yeah, that kind of a thing, like it might have been used to transport something.
Okay.
And I'm looking at this thing, and I'm like freaking out. I'm thinking, what am I looking at? It's moon. I see this piece of physical debris out the moon. And then I hear this voice. And the voice is it's a southern voice, a very kind of like, it seemed to me like a military officer. Man, excuse me, ma'am, but you don't belong here right now. I think you should move on. I think you should get out of here.
Really?
Because this is like, not where you ought to be. And then at the time, I could have told you better the exact words that the voice said.
Uh-huh.
All right? Well, I left. I was confounded. I wondered whether it was just simply my imagination. But I wrote it down, and I put it on my blog, and you read it. And it was there.
Mm-hmm.
It disappeared from my blog. I don't know when, because, my blog has 100 or more articles on it. So I looked at it for a while. I went back trying to find it at one point a couple of months ago, maybe in the springtime. Gone.
Wow.
Crickets, gone.
Wow.
Nothing there.
Wow.
The only thing that didn't take off was my tag which was Save the Moon.
Huh.
And so I know it was there because otherwise the tag Save the Moon would have never been up.
Yeah, that is so strange.
So it was really, really pretty strange. But there are a number of remote viewers of great fame who have remote viewed things involving UFOs and aliens. The one thing that I would say is that in favor of military remote viewing is that when the military used remote viewing with all the very intense protocol that they developed to silence the right brain, they would look at a target. They would have a number of different tried and true remote viewers like Joe McMoneagle and Ingo Swann and a group of other, Pat Price and other people go and look at the same target, and they would pay attention to it when more than one person got similar results.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing that, they avoided the fact that, when you're dealing with something like this, anybody could be off.
Exactly, because you'd never know.
You would never know. Now, most of the remote views of aliens and or UFOs, even when done by remote viewers, were done by single remote viewers. Such as, Joe McMoneagle remote viewed. He didn't know where he was remote viewing. He could have been remote viewing, a basement in the Soviet Union, the then Soviet Union, because they wanted to find out about who or what was in the basement. You understand what I'm saying?
Sure.
He had no idea in time or space where he was remote viewing. Well, he was actually remote viewing Mars.
Wow.
And he remote viewed large humanoid figures, much bigger than humans, whoa. 10, 12 feet tall.
He remote viewed a base on Mars?
He remote viewed the past on Mars.
The past?
The past.
Ah.
Yes, like millennia ago. This is what he saw. But he went there.
And he's good.
Not knowing what he was looking at. Likewise.
Wow, that's fascinating stuff. So he went back to the past on Mars.
Yes.
And saw these humanoid figures there.
Right. Now, I know Joe. I think he's a great guy. I think that it's worth checking out and looking at.
Okay.
But that was one person's remote view.
Okay.
It is interesting that what he saw did fit the target. In other words, the target was Mars.
Okay.
And he went back originally. He saw like artifacts. Then then he delved further, and he went back in time, and he saw these huge people, and you can read about it on the internet.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, just quickly, we also had a question that came in from Dale that would sort of tie in with this. He was wondering if ETs could be from a different dimension rather than different planets. Is there any chance that it was a different dimension on Mars? Or
both.
Or both, okay.
I mean, I can't speak for Joe McMonagle's remote view. Only he can speak for his remote view. I can only tell you what it contains. Now, similarly, Ingo Swann, who was at SRI, and Pat Price, who unfortunately has passed on, who was also an original remote viewer at SRI. They both saw things. Ingo Swann saw beings on the far side of the moon, and had an experience of being taken to the moon by some being. And Pat Price viewed UFO bases below the ocean. Now, I'm going through this quickly to kind of say to you that this is interesting. Mm-hmm. It's noteworthy. It's not provable because it was only remote viewed by one person. But on the other hand, Skip Atwater has his blog. He talks about a ship that was remote viewed by a number of remote viewers from Argentina, a naval ship, where all the people went missing on the naval ship. Ooh. And everybody who remote viewed it sort of saw a kind of an alien presence that removed the folks that were on there, the naval officers, etc.
Wow. Well, Earl had written in too, and he was wondering if you had comments about Ingo Swann or Major Ed Dames. But these people that you're mentioning are in that field. They're well respected, and they're trained. I mean, these aren't people that just write a book like, last night I had a dream about the moon. I mean, this comes after long years of training and interest, and so I think you have a great deal of respect for them, don't you?
Well, I do, and I do want to go back to something that I had started earlier, that to tell you how I did get into the Monroe Institute and how I started to go there on a once or twice a year basis, and I eventually did take remote viewing with Skip Atwater and Paul Elder, and Joe McMonagle was there frequently. Had lunches with him, he answered all kinds of questions that I had. So I mean, I had some real grounding with those folks, right. And then later on, a fellow named Alan Steinfeld, who is he's a fellow who organizes events in New York City. He had Russell Targ there to promote one of his books and kind of a one-night remote viewing seminar, and I went to that. And I found that Targ was a lot looser about his protocol. Like, it was a lot easier. It was less military. And I was very much attracted to that, and I did very well that night in the targets. I mean, I really did very well. So I had wanted over and over again to study with Russell at some juncture in the future. And this past summer, I got the feeling if you don't go now, you might as well forget it. Oh. So I dropped everything, and I went up to the Omega Institute, cut all kinds of corners and did all kinds of things to get up to the Omega Institute this summer to study with Russell Targ and Stephen Schwartz, remote viewing again. And when I got there, I found out a couple of days into the course, we were at dinner one night, the whole group of remote viewers, and a big cake comes over to the table for Russell Targ. And it said, "Congratulations on your retirement, you're well-deserved." And it turns out that this was the last class Mr. Targ planned to do.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, we're going to take a quick break, but we will be right back. This is Kate Valentine. I'm speaking to Fahrusha about remote viewing. Post your comments and questions on our website at AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. And as soon as we get back, we will find out about Fahrusha's course with Russell Targ. It's also quite interesting. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Our guest today is Fahrusha, a well-known New York psychic and the author of an extremely interesting weblog. You should really check it out. Right today, she is telling us all about remote viewing. And Fahrusha, just before the break, we were starting to tell your experience with Russell Targ, and that you just happened to catch him on his last class.
Yes, and I felt enormously gratified to have gone to that class. It was he and Stephen Schwartz, and if anybody, I want to make a comment on Mr. Schwartz, has a wonderful newsletter called The Schwartz Report, and he is also responsible for having done a lot of archaeological remote viewing, which was very successful. Wow. And there are books on it. I don't want to go into the details, but he feels that he did give the U.S. government the information about where Saddam Hussein was hiding.
Really?
And you can read all about that through him. I don't need to go through details on that because it's not about UFOs particularly. But he's excellent as well. But the thing about doing the class with Russell Targ is that I felt that he was an extremely good instructor. I very much resonated with his methods because I don't really resonate with an extreme protocol which goes into a ritual, which is what the Navy remote viewing program was. And if people are interested in that, they can go to the Hawaii Remote Viewers Association if they want to do that kind of remote viewing. It's out there and it's helpful for some people. But I liked Targ's version better.
Rosanna, you used the word resonate. Do you think that since this is from the left brain and it is sort of I don't know, how would you put it, like a thought wave type thing, do you think that your thoughts were in resonance and they then became stronger than either one alone?
Oh, I think that people, if people all remote view the same target and they get consistent reports about that target that mirror one another on some level, there certainly creates a kind of resonance around the target. I feel that what was needed for me, though, that I received in this class was that the importance of the person who is the interviewer, which wasn't brought out so much in the other classes which I took because it just wasn't it wasn't applicable. It would be hard to institute that. But when you sit down with the remote viewer and the interviewer does not know what the target is either. But the interviewer can keep you on track. Okay. Can keep you from wandering off and say, well, what's around though? Have you wandered off? But can you give me the texture of the place or whatever? And so the questioning that the interviewer does can bring you back on track, and this is what I needed. Okay,
that makes sense. And did you see anything of real interest or any? Because I was always interested in that. The fact that some people had seen things on Mars and the moon and UFOs and so on, but what Joe McGonigal, I'm sorry about that.
Yes.
Isn't that terrible? I tell you, I have such a mental block with that.
Mon-Eagle.
Mon-Eagle, all right.
Mon-Eagle.
Yeah, I know. But what he said was very interesting, was that you can't just pick anything you'd like to see. It sort of has to come to you in a way. I guess you have to have some sense of what you're looking for. Like you can't just go into a crazy sort of a state and something comes to you. As you said, you need numbers. You need some sort of an indication of what to look for.
Well, the remote viewing process, as opposed to general clairvoyance, is, as we spoke of, a protocol. Now, the protocol varies from group to group. Like the SRI protocol was the original protocol. That was then broken down into the Defense Intelligence Agency protocol, which was people like McMoneagle and Skip Atwater was running the show for a while, and Lynn Buchanan and my original teacher, David Morehouse. They were all involved with the Army Air Force Defense Intelligence Agency project. It went a different way. at the same time as the Army Air Force was doing it, the Navy was doing it, but the Navy didn't know the Army was doing it, and the Army didn't know the Navy was doing it. The Navy protocol got very, very specific, very ritualistic. Your pencil has to be, at a right angle to your paper.
Oh.
You have to, the detail to shut down the left brain so that the right brain can function was extreme, and it was good because you think of the kind of guys that are in the military. They're used to a kind of very structured situation, and they're constantly analyzing their environment. So you want to shut that all down and let the right brain shut the right brain down, let the left brain perform. Okay?
Okay. Well, what have been some of your experiences? Have you had any real breakthroughs that you feel?
Well, I have hit targets with remote viewing in classes. The problem with remote viewing for the individual who's working alone is that you don't have an interviewer, that you don't have somebody to set the target for you.
Okay.
So that my applicability of this is I try to use the hemisync, that music that comes from the Monroe Institute, the binaural beats. I try to use that, and they have a new type of beat also that they're debuting now. But I try to use that. I try to use meditation, the Gansfield type sensory deprivation kind of situation in order to work on my own, psychic functioning. In terms of remote viewing, you kind of need a team. And I don't have a team.
Isn't it? Because you certainly had that view of the moon and that warning to back off from it.
Yes, I did.
And that was very interesting. And it seems like almost, there's so many stories about like why we haven't gone back to the moon because we've been warned off the moon, and that, so-and-so saw UFOs on the moon, and it's no, someone didn't see it. And I think it's very interesting that you saw a craft on the moon, and then you were warned off.
Some form of machinery that was a kind of long line that looked disused. I don't know what I was seeing precisely. I was scared off very quickly. But in terms of people who are interested in the moon and remote viewing, I hope that they look at what Ingo Swann's experiences were, how he purports that he was actually taken to the moon. This goes back a little bit, though, to the difference between the protocol of remote viewing versus astral travel versus out-of-body experience. In out-of-body experience, you actually 100% believe that you're somewhere else. Your spirit is absolutely out of your body. Remote viewing, you're not supposed to interact with your environment that you go to. In other words, you're viewing it, but you're not supposed to be there, essentially. And then there's something sort of in between, which I call astral projection, which I think that many of the people at the Monroe Institute, due to the fact that you are in a sensory deprived situation, that you're really astrally projecting to the places and not remote viewing them.
Wow. And so most of those people that are there believe in this, and that they then are with people who also believe, that just further strengthens their own belief. And they probably, you're probably right. You're getting, with a team, you get much better results than individually.
Absolutely. Yeah. I had a roommate there for another program that I did, and we went to the same place in our meditation, and it was quite amazing. We saw the exact same things in a certain portion of our meditation, and this was not programmed in any way. And I do find that the people that go for these things, whether they go up to the Omega Institute or they go to the Monroe Institute, these are people who are seekers. They're people who try to find out more about the nature of consciousness. Because when you get right down to it, that's what it's all about. It's about consciousness. And it's about realizing that consciousness is not local. And if consciousness is not local, you can project your consciousness to other places through remote viewing protocol or something allied to that.
Wow. Well, Fahrusha, I think that's a wonderful note to end on, and very encouraging too. I want to thank you so much for this interview. It was really terrific fun. It gave me a lot to think about.
I had a great time too. It's always great talking to you.
Well, thanks. Now, how's the best way for our listeners to get onto your weblog other than psychic viewing?
Fahrusha.
Okay.
.wordpress.com.
Okay.
And how we spell Fahrusha? Fahrusha.
Terrific. Okay. Well, thank you again. You have a great
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you. Okay. Well, and of course, as always, thanks to both Bill and Dave, and especially thank you, our listeners. I hope you enjoyed this discussion and gave you a little bit something to think about this weekend. If you missed any of it, you can catch it again this Sunday at 4. Or on their podcast, and now on YouTube. Have a wonderful weekend. Next Friday, Denise Stoner and Kathleen Martin will be back with us to discuss their investigations into abductions, which is pretty interesting. So we'll see you next Friday at 1. And until then, remember, keep your eye on the sky. Bye.
I want to read a comment from Niels Bohr, who was one of the fathers of quantum physics. And he says here, everything we call real is made of things that cannot be regarded as real. Huh. If quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet.
I would say truer words were never spoken, but I think he was predated by Shakespeare, who said, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
Exactly. Well, I think that what I'd kind of like to do is to tell you about how I came into remote viewing.
Okay, that would be...
And it involves kind of a lot of synchronicities that are very odd.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing. Like they always say, there's no such thing as coincidences. And so you feel like you were sort of drawn into this field.
Yes. Well, I definitely do. I've always been interested and involved with ESP. I've always been interested and involved with, astronomy, and I have been, as you know, an experiencer. As a child, I always had the feeling that reality wasn't quite real. I don't know where I got that from, but it always seemed to me like I wouldn't be surprised if an arm came through the wall out of nowhere.
Wow. Well,
I mean, that's maybe people would say I'm mentally ill, and they wouldn't be the first. But going back to the remote viewing, and I think that I should stress the one thing that I said to begin with, and then go into my own experiences, and that is about the protocol.
Okay.
Clairvoyance is basically, being able to see. The ability to gain information about an object, a person, a location, or physical event through means other than the known human senses. Okay? That's what clairvoyance is. Now, remote viewing is just a protocol to train clairvoyance, and it has been used by the American military. All right? So it keeps the viewer focused. It's a way to close down the left brain and ignite the right brain, sort of. And we'll get into that a little bit more later if you want. But about 10 years ago, I had the misfortune of having two dying parents. And being an only child, I had to sort of, be in charge of what was going on. And in 2003, my mother was very ill. My father had already died, and she was taken into a rehabilitation program. You know how people, they fall down or whatever happens to elderly people, and sometimes they're able to go into a place to get some kind of rehabilitative exercises, etc.
Sure.
And so my mom was in one of those for a period. I think it was 15 or 18 days, and I had been, doing nothing but taking care of my parents for a year. So I decided to do something. Specifically, back in the 70s, Russell Targ and Harold Putoff founded the Stanford Research Institute at Stanford University and did physics experiments, which can be read about, and I don't want to go into incredible detail about that, but they did experiments in which they put people into some amount of sensory deprivation, and they did experiments whereby people went out into the field while somebody else stayed in the sensory deprived room. And the person in the sensory deprived room could tell things about where the person out in the field was. Does that make sense? Or
yes, it does.
A little oblique?
No, not at all. And actually, I think the audience, not as you said, not to get into that right now, but the SRI, that institute,
yes.
If they're interested in this at all, they should look that up on the net and go into it, because I think that was almost the start, especially with people like Russell Targ and Hal Putoff.
It was the start.
Yeah. And, both of these guys were pretty brilliant. I don't know so much about Targ, but I mean, certainly Putoff is a brilliant physicist and lent it a little bit credibility that a lot of these fields had been lacking up until now.
Well, yes. I'm gonna say I also know Targ, and he's a really great guy and a very smart man, beyond belief. And the two of them, I don't know Putoff at all, but they started the SRI. Has been experienced in human history for millennia. You can find clairvoyance back in the Hindu Vedic texts and so forth. I mean, it's not something new to the world, clairvoyance. It's something that's sort of shrouded in mystery, and it's something that the 19th century paradigm of the physical universe kind of poo-pooed.
Yes.
Because most of us here in the world today are still living in the 19th century paradigm of physics, which is a mechanistic view of the way the world works. And frankly, that view brought us a lot of great things. It allowed us to understand laws of motion as they apply to large-scale things, and we have airplanes and all sorts of things as a result of that.
Right.
However, physics has gone further, and now we have quantum theory and so forth, and string theory. And so while clairvoyance was poo-pooed by the 19th century mechanistic worldview, it has come into more interest since people have begun understanding quantum physics. Okay?
Yes.
And so remote viewing is a protocol for clairvoyance. Now, what do I mean by that? Well,
mighty phantoms of the evening sky, to whom do these celestial steeds belong when you appear to us like gods on high, which brings you here to mystify?
Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Joining us today once again is my good friend Fahrusha. She is one of New York's top psychics and the author of a most interesting blog. But today, Fahrusha is going to be telling us all about remote viewing. So welcome back to the show, Fahrusha. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Kate. How's it going?
Actually, pretty good.
Good.
And, I was reading Joe McGonigle's, I can never get his last name. McGonigal, thank you. That's sort of an odd name. I was reading his book on remote viewing because, I'm not really all that familiar with it. And it was very interesting. He was, if anything, I think somewhat discouraging, because I think most people don't realize what really is meant by remote viewing. So maybe you could fill us in on that.
Okay. I have had the privilege of meeting Joe and knowing Joe personally, so I can say that his books are wonderful, and I highly recommend them to start out with. But remote viewing is basically a protocol for clairvoyance, and perhaps other forms of clairsentience as well. Now, clairvoyance is something that